There are Nazi experiments so horrific, so twisted, that not even history books dared to record them. These weren't just cruel, they were unnatural. Forgotten programs that sought to control minds, manipulate time, and reshape humanity into something inhuman. Hidden in sealed bunkers, burned files, and whispers from survivors, these experiments were meant to disappear forever. But today, their secrets resurface disturbing, unexplained, and real. These are the 5 most disturbing Nazi experiments erased from history. In the final winter of 1943, 2 young girls arrived at Ravensbrück concentration camp under extraordinary secrecy. They were not registered under any known name, and their arrival was undocumented except for a single torn page later recovered from the SS archives. The page listed their designation as Experiment 943-T, unspoken link. Camp survivors would later call them the Silent Twins. The girls, believed to be no older than 10, were identical in every physical way: pale skin, coal-black hair, piercing gray eyes. One survivor, a Polish nurse named Elżbieta Kroll, described them as moving like shadows, always together, never speaking a word. The twins, thought to have come from the Eastern Front, perhaps Ukraine or Belarus, were brought directly to the barracks reserved for experimental subjects. Ravensbrück was a camp notorious not just for its cruelty but for the grotesque variety of experiments conducted on women and children. Yet even among the horrors, the twins stood out. They were kept isolated in a soundproof building that had previously been a storage shed. The windows were sealed shut. No one entered except the head of medical experimentation, Dr. Clara Heinz, and her assistants. Dr. Heinz was one of the very few female doctors in the SS Research Division, and her obsession was human consciousness, specifically, the possibility of nonverbal, psychic communication. According to confiscated journals and testimony from her captured assistants, she believed that identical twins held the key to unlocking a telepathic field connecting all human minds. The Silent Twins became her most secret and prized subjects. Each day, one twin was taken into an adjacent room while the other remained under observation. Electrodes were attached to their heads, and machines, crude by modern standards, attempted to monitor brainwaves for synchronicity. Visual and auditory stimuli were introduced: flashing lights, static pulses, recorded voices of loved ones from their village, captured before deportation, even the sound of the other twin crying. One assistant later recounted how both twins would flinch, blink, or cry at the exact same moment, even though they were isolated and unable to see or hear each other. But the experiments didn't stop at simple observation. Dr. Heinz introduced a cruel layer to her studies: forced pain. One twin would be pricked with needles, slapped, or given mild electric shocks, while the other was monitored. When the twin being harmed screamed, the other often mirrored her agony seconds later, showing signs of distress on command. Dr. Heinz noted in her journal that the pain was transmitted, not through sound, nor through sight. It is something older, more primal. As weeks passed, the twins stopped responding to verbal commands. They withdrew entirely into themselves, communicating only through glances, body language, and perfectly mirrored actions. Elżbieta, who once brought them water and bread, claimed she watched one girl reach out for food with her right hand while her sister, 5 meters away, separated by a wall, mimicked the exact gesture at the same moment. It was like watching 2 puppets moved by the same invisible hand, she said. In January 1944, the experiments took a darker turn. The girls were placed in deprivation tanks for extended periods, completely dark, soundless enclosures meant to sever all external contact. Dr. Heinz hypothesized that in the absence of all sensory input, the psychic link would become stronger. On the 5th day of this trial, something changed. One assistant reportedly fled the lab in terror, refusing to return. He claimed that during the deprivation session, both girls began to hum the same melody, low, ancient, almost like a lullaby. Their voices blended into one. Neither had spoken a word in months. The humming grew louder and more rhythmic, building to a chant. The equipment began to malfunction. One of the bulbs burst. The assistant swore he felt a pressure in his skull, as though something was trying to get in. 2 days later, the twins were moved without explanation. No one saw them again. Their cell was found empty, bedding undisturbed, and the walls scratched with symbols, some resembling Slavic runes, others unlike anything known. The only written record left behind was a single sentence scrawled by Dr. Hines in her journal before she disappeared. The silence speaks louder than the living. When Allied forces liberated Ravensbrück in 1945, there was no trace of the twins. Dr. Hines was never captured. Her remaining files were burned in the retreating firestorm, but fragments of her journal were found in a Berlin safehouse, pages warped by heat and moisture, scrawled with diagrams, spirals, and words written backward. Some believe the twins died during the final stage of testing, their bond severed by the inhuman stress placed upon them. Others think they survived, spirited away into deeper SS projects or hidden away as failures. But there are whispers, legends among survivors and locals near Ravensbrück, of two pale women seen walking in sync, never speaking, always watching. They say if you see one, the other is not far behind. And neither is ever truly alone. Buried beneath the snow-covered hills of Bavaria, not far from the village of Berchtesgaden, lies the crumbled remains of what locals still refer to as Das Schwarze Nest, the Black Nest. Few dare to go near it. Trees don't grow on the surrounding hill, and hunters say animals avoid the area entirely. What happened there was buried under classified files and whispered warnings. But now, from recovered documentation and fragmentary testimony, the truth begins to emerge. Project Nachtauge, translated as Night Eye, was a top-secret SS initiative launched in 1942, aiming to engineer soldiers capable of operating in complete darkness. Himmler himself is said to have approved the project, obsessed with ancient myths of nocturnal warriors and the concept of vision beyond the veil. The Nazi regime, increasingly desperate to gain any tactical advantage, turned toward science twisted by occultism and pseudo-medicine. The facility was headed by Dr. Hans Strasser, a brilliant but unstable ophthalmologist who had already performed illegal eye transplants on political prisoners in other camps. Strasser believed that the human eye had untapped potential that could be unlocked using the eyes of nocturnal predators, particularly owls and cats. Under his orders, the Nachtauge project harvested retinas and vitreous fluid from animals and injected the mixture directly into the eyes of human subjects, mostly prisoners deemed expendable, Jews, Roma, and Soviet POWs. The injections were just the beginning. Over a period of 3 months, subjects were also exposed to intense doses of infrared light, placed in pitch-black rooms for days, and forced to navigate deadly mazes filled with traps. The goal was not just survival, but transformation. Some victims were operated on, having their irises surgically reshaped or replaced with modified prosthetics laced with reflective compounds. Strasser claimed he could create a living lens, capable of perceiving the full spectrum of light, including the unseen. A Dutch prisoner, Willem Dekker, later testified at Nuremberg about his time in the nest. He described how those injected would scream for hours, clutching their heads as their vision blurred into kaleidoscopic madness. They saw things, he said, not just in the dark, beyond the dark. Some would claw at their faces until they tore out their own eyes. Others wandered aimlessly, mumbling about moving shadows and windows that bleed light. Yet a few, only a handful, did not go mad. These successes were placed into the second phase of experimentation. They were taken to underground fields where moonlight barely reached and made to hunt fellow prisoners for food and water. One recovered report stated that Subject 9B, a young Polish woman, was able to identify and capture a moving target in total darkness within 40 seconds. Her pupils were noted to glow faintly green, like those of a cat. But the changes were not merely physical. According to the journal of one of Strasser's assistants, subjects who survived the treatments exhibited heightened aggression, aversion to daylight, and, most disturbingly, unpredictable psychic symptoms. One woman began speaking in multiple voices at once, claiming she could see death in people's bones. Another refused to enter any room with mirrors, shrieking violently when forced to look at herself. A third subject was found crouching in a ventilation shaft, staring at the wall, whispering over and over, "It's looking back." The project was never officially terminated. Instead, It ended abruptly in the spring of 1944 after a violent explosion tore through the underground facility. Official German reports claimed it was an accident, leaking gas ignited by faulty wiring. But declassified British intelligence documents suggest sabotage from within, possibly by one of the surviving test subjects. Allied scouts who entered the site weeks later found the lower levels burned beyond recognition. But what they did find raised more questions than it answered. In a locked, temperature-controlled chamber, miraculously spared from the fire, were several rows of preserved eyeballs stored in glowing blue liquid. Notes beside them bore strange notations, including phrases like Phase 5, piercing the veil, and alpha spectrum response achieved. One jar had no label, only a single sentence scrawled on the lid, "They still see." Dr. Strasser's body was never recovered. Some believe he died in the explosion, others think he fled east under a false identity. In 1961, an American tourist went missing while hiking near the ruins. When her camera was recovered by rescue teams, the last photograph showed what appeared to be a man standing deep in the forest, his eyes reflecting light, even though the photo had been taken with no flash, at dusk. Today, the forest surrounding the black nest is silent. Locals report strange lights hovering between the trees at night. Hikers speak of an unsettling feeling, as if something is watching from the darkness. And now and then, a figure is spotted moving without a flashlight, swift, silent, with eyes that catch the moonlight and shimmer green. In the final throes of Nazi desperation, as the Eastern Front collapsed and Berlin's fall became inevitable, the SS turned toward experiments so bizarre and desperate that even their own officers hesitated to document them. One such project took place deep within the Gross-Rosen concentration camp in Lower Silesia, a facility already notorious for bone-breaking labor and medical horror. But beneath the surface, in a cold subterranean wing known only as Block E7, a series of experiments took place that aimed to conquer not space, but time. Codenamed Zeitstillstand, time freezing, the project was overseen by a small but secretive team of SS scientists led by Professor Dieter Eichel, a physicist who had once taught at Heidelberg before his theories veered into occult fringe science. According to declassified documents, Professor Eichel believed time could be manipulated on a biological level by inducing hypothermic stasis, slowing or even halting metabolic processes so that a human could pause in time. He envisioned armies of soldiers frozen in moments of trauma, reawakened days or years later to resume fighting, unaged, unspoiled. To pursue this fantasy, the SS allocated special funding and a hand-picked team of engineers, physicians, and physicists. Prisoners, mainly Soviet captives and political dissenters, were selected at random and labeled as chrono-subjects. They were taken to Block E7, stripped naked, and immersed in large cylindrical tanks filled with near-frozen saline solution. These tanks, cooled by a complex piping system powered by stolen Allied refrigeration technology, could reach sub-zero temperatures without forming ice. The goal was to maintain a liquid environment just cold enough to nearly suspend biological activity, but not kill the subject. Initial tests lasted mere minutes, then stretched into hours. By the end of 1943, some prisoners were being submerged for up to 5 days. Electrodes were attached to their heads and chests to monitor brain activity and heart function. The results were both fascinating and horrifying. Many subjects died within the first hour, their bodies succumbing to cardiac arrest or severe cerebral trauma. But a few did not. One of Eichel's assistants, a Czech doctor named Janos Kovarik, later confessed in a post-war tribunal that at least 4 subjects survived full 72-hour immersions. He described a Soviet soldier, subject number 27, who had been clinically dead for nearly a full day. No heartbeat, no breathing. Then, without external stimulation, his heart restarted. Monitors showed a slow, rhythmic pulse. His eyes opened. He screamed for 3 hours straight, unable to recognize speech or light. Survivors of the tests were said to enter strange mental states upon revival. Some were catatonic, others violent and animalistic. A female subject, recovered after 48 hours in stasis, began speaking in Polish, but in a voice and dialect that had not been used in over 300 years, according to linguists who later reviewed the transcripts. Another man wrote pages of complex equations in blood, using symbols no one could identify. Perhaps most disturbing were the reports of temporal dislocation. Victims claimed to experience strange visions while submerged, cities burning backwards, the faces of unborn children, and voices speaking from moments that hadn't happened yet. One note from Eichel reads, Subject 31 says he saw his own execution before it happened. Described his killer in detail. 3 days later, it was accurate. A logbook recovered by Allied soldiers later contained fragments of Eichel's personal research. He wrote about pockets in time, psychological echoes, and chronological feedback loops. He believed the experiments were not just freezing bodies, but exposing minds to raw, unfiltered time, past, present, and possible future. The human brain, he theorized, was simply too limited to handle that kind of perspective. The damage wasn't physical, but temporal. The mind splintered across the timeline. Near the end of the war, the experiments accelerated. More prisoners were pushed into the tanks, some in groups. Multiple subjects were frozen simultaneously in attempts to measure shared time distortion. One particularly grisly record details a pair of twins who were submerged in the same tank. They awoke speaking the same sentence, in unison, describing a burning sun and a door in the sky. Neither had any memory of who they were. Then, without warning, Block E7 was abandoned. Soviet forces closing in on the area found the chambers flooded and partially destroyed. The main freezing tanks were shattered, and the power systems sabotaged. No living subjects remained, but one tank was still partially filled with frozen brine. Inside it was a man's body, skin intact, eyes open, preserved in a state of near-perfect suspension. The body was removed and taken to Moscow, where it disappeared into KGB custody. Professor Eichel was never captured. In 1956, a man matching his description was seen in Buenos Aires working at a hospital under a different name. When investigators returned, the man had vanished again. No trace of him has ever been confirmed since. To this day, Gross-Rosen's Block E7 is sealed. The Polish government, citing dangerous environmental conditions, prohibits excavation. However, hikers have reported hearing mechanical sounds deep beneath the ground at night, like humming machines still active, still cooling. There are conspiracy theorists who claim that remnants of the time freezing project were absorbed by both American and Soviet black programs during the Cold War. Some say deep cryogenic facilities exist beneath Denver Airport or in Siberian bunkers, keeping select individuals on pause until needed. But the most unsettling rumor of all? That time didn't just freeze for the victims, it cracked. And through that crack, something else may have seen in. Dachau was the first Nazi concentration camp, and one of the most well-documented. But buried beneath the layers of public record, testimonies, and Allied reports is something that even the most seasoned investigators have struggled to make sense of. Among the recovered files in 1945, there was a thin folder marked with the word Flüstern, German for whispers. It contained only fragments, torn diagrams, half-burned audio logs, and one chilling line written in red ink across the cover. Sound can shatter sanity. Known internally as the Whispers Project, this covert operation took place in a sealed annex of Dachau's medical wing, accessible only through a metal door that was later found welded shut from the inside. According to the recovered notes and post-war interrogations, the project was overseen by Dr. Otto Merenstein, a psychiatrist with a background in music theory and neuroacoustics. He was obsessed with the psychological manipulation of sound, not just through language, but through tones, rhythms, and frequencies that bypassed conscious perception. Dr. Merenstein believed the human brain could be reprogrammed by manipulating auditory input. The Nazis, already obsessed with propaganda and mind control, funded the Whispers Project with the intent of creating a new kind of weapon, not one that killed the body, but one that shattered the mind. The victims were selected carefully. Political prisoners, musicians, linguists, even priests, anyone believed to have a sensitive connection to language and sound. They were brought into a room lined with thick, padded walls. Microphones were hung from the ceiling. Hidden speakers were installed behind the walls, wired to crude oscillators and reel-to-reel playback devices. The subjects called it the room that breathed. For hours, sometimes days, they were subjected to audio experiments. Whispered voices layered atop one another, reversed speeches played at subsonic frequencies, and chants in long-dead dialects. Sometimes the recordings were of nothing more than silence, modulated at frequencies barely audible to the human ear. The result was always the same: deterioration of the mind. One prisoner, a former seminary student from Munich, survived 72 hours inside. When pulled out, he had torn out his fingernails and gouged at his ears, mumbling the phrase, "He speaks through the silence." He died shortly after, but not before writing a strange circular symbol on the wall of his cell using his own blood. That symbol would later appear in several other cells. Another subject, a violinist, was said to have composed an entire concerto in his cell without any instrument. He used soot and his own saliva to write the notation on the concrete floor. When translated and played by researchers decades later, the piece contained irregular rhythms that caused some listeners to cry uncontrollably, while others suffered nausea and dizziness. The original sheet was destroyed after a researcher reportedly suffered a seizure while analyzing the final movement. Dr. Merenstein documented everything meticulously in his journals. He claimed to have identified a series of resonant keys, specific tones that caused predictable emotional states in the listener: despair, rage, apathy, euphoria. One key, he wrote, induced near-death dissociation, allowing the subject to describe events in adjacent rooms without leaving the chair. He believed the right frequency could open the mind like a door. But over time, the lines blurred. Merenstein's final notes grew erratic, written in jagged pen strokes across page edges and margins. He began referring to a presence he called the voice behind the wall. He believed it was not simply madness but reception, that the tones had tuned his brain to pick up something beyond ordinary human perception. He wrote, "It's not just sound. It's transmission. It's waiting." In January 1945, the annex was sealed by Merenstein himself. Survivors later said they heard screams echoing from the hall for days afterward. When Allied forces entered Dachau that April, they found the door to the Whisper's wing welded shut from the inside with heavy chains bolted across. After several hours of torch cutting, they breached the door. Inside, they found the equipment destroyed, speakers smashed, wires ripped out, and walls scratched with dozens of concentric circles and symbols. The air was cold, unnaturally still. The lighting had been sabotaged, but flickering emergency bulbs cast long, trembling shadows. No bodies were found. Only one item remained intact, a reel-to-reel audio recorder, still humming. The tape was blank to the ear, but when analyzed decades later using modern audio equipment, strange waveforms were discovered, subharmonics buried so deep they could only be heard with specialized machines. The playback reportedly caused headaches, insomnia, and in one case, vivid hallucinations. The tape was sealed by the German government in 1983 and has never been made public. Some say the Whispers project didn't fail, that it succeeded far too well. That sound, once weaponized, could still be out there, in a lost recording, a forgotten radio transmission, or hidden in the background noise of an old propaganda film, waiting to be heard again. So if you ever feel something brush the edge of your thoughts when you're listening to static, if a whisper seems too clear, too purposeful, turn it off. It might not be your imagination. At the edge of the Carpathian Mountains, where the forests grow impossibly dense and the fog clings low to the earth, there is a place the locals call Wald der Waisen, the Forest of the Orphans. Few enter it willingly. Hunters avoid it. Hikers return shaken. And though no official maps label what lies within, those who live nearby speak of strange laughter echoing through the trees, of movement just beyond the lantern's glow, and of ghostly figures seen flitting through the woods, small, pale, and silent. The origin of these legends can be traced back to one of the most secret and deeply disturbing operations of the Nazi regime, a project known internally as Himmler's Arkansas. Approved under the Lebensborn program and conducted in total secrecy between 1942 and 1944, this experiment aimed not to destroy life, but to reshape it. Unlike the typical horrors of medical testing or eugenics, Himmler's Ark was an attempt at controlled, natural evolution. The goal was the creation of a pure, primal Aryan child, untainted by society, culture, or even language. Children, selected from Nazi-occupied territories for their Aryan traits, blonde hair, blue eyes, symmetrical features, were kidnapped, classified, and transported to a secret forest compound in the Carpathians. There, they were raised without human interaction. Constructed in a wide, fenced-off woodland clearing was a self-contained ecosystem. Dozens of steel and glass observation towers encircled it. Inside the perimeter were huts, feeding troughs, small ponds, and sleeping chambers that mimicked animal dens. The children, between the ages of 2 and 6, were left in this environment to grow as a natural tribe. They were provided with food via automatic dispensers and occasionally tranquilized for health checks, but were never spoken to, never nurtured, never taught a single word. SS records unearthed in 1978 refer to this as die erste Stufe, the first stage. Scientists monitored their development from behind mirrored panels, taking meticulous notes on behavior, language formation, aggression, and dominance. The children, deprived of culture and morality, were meant to evolve from a blank state into a new human baseline. Footage recovered from the ruins decades later, grainy and silent, showed children moving in organized packs, walking on all fours for extended periods, communicating through guttural sounds and hand signals. One researcher wrote, "They do not weep. They do not laugh. Their eyes are blank. They are not innocent. They are empty." But as the experiment continued, the results became stranger. By 1944, observers noted that the children had developed coordinated group behaviors that could not be explained by mimicry or survival instinct. They began building primitive effigies from wood and animal bones, odd, symmetrical structures placed in patterns only visible from the air. They avoided certain areas of the compound completely, as if repelled by something invisible. Most chillingly, they began to communicate without sound. Observers noted that one child would tilt their head, and others across the clearing would respond in kind. It was as if thought itself had become their language. The SS scientists overseeing the project began to argue. Some believed the children were evolving into something higher, beyond language, beyond morality. Others warned they were becoming something else entirely. One file described the children's eyes as too aware, and their behavior ritualistic. A top-secret order from Berlin demanded that the entire project be relocated or terminated, fearing Allied discovery. But before that could happen, the compound went dark. In January 1945, as Soviet forces pushed westward, the SS attempted to erase all traces of Himmler's Arkansas flamethrowers were used to destroy the observation towers. Lab notes were burned. Files were evacuated or buried. But when troops arrived to execute the purge, they found the compound already deserted. No children. No bodies. No signs of escape. The only remaining witness was a low-ranking technician, found wandering miles away, barefoot and in shock. His testimony was erratic and filled with contradictions. He claimed the children melted into the trees, and that one had spoken in his mind. Before being taken away, he whispered a final phrase, "They've gone where we can't follow." After the war, the forest was declared contaminated and off-limits. Soviet soldiers sent to investigate went missing. Romanian villagers nearby abandoned their homes. It became a dead zone, a piece of land no one wanted to claim. But stories remained. In 1959, a group of hunters entered the forest and did not return. Their rifles were later found snapped in half, laid in a circle. In 1974, a geologist taking soil samples reported hearing a chorus of children humming from beneath the ground. And in 1998, an amateur filmmaker went missing while investigating wartime ruins in the area. The footage recovered from his camera shows fleeting glimpses of small, pale figures darting between trees, silent, watching. Today, no official record of Himmler's Ark exists. It is not acknowledged in any war tribunal or post-war archive. But the remnants of the facility are still there, crumbling in the forest. Shattered glass. Scorched observation towers. Strange symbols carved into stone. Some say the children died in the fire. Others say they escaped. But there are those, scientists, occultists, and conspiracy theorists, who believe the experiment worked too well. That these children, untouched by civilization and forged by unnatural isolation, evolved into something beyond humanity. Something still out there, watching, waiting, and whispering in a language we no longer understand. Every case adds a new layer of mystery, leaving more questions than answers. Which one lingers in your mind, and what's your take on what really happened?